lockdown. We can't. There's nothing open. You know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I feel like we went to sleep in March and now it's August.
I know. It's like the whole, I just feel like we went to sleep in March and then we're going to wake up at the end of the year and it'll be 2021.
Exactly.
The way it's going.
Yeah, honestly. So, yeah, I don't know when things are going. It opens and then it spikes and then it closes and then it opens and then it spikes and then it closes. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Never ending until there's a vaccine, I suppose. That's the way it's going to be.
Yeah, that's, I think, what we're all just holding out for. But hi, everyone who's joining us. We'll just wait a couple of minutes before we get started. You can take this opportunity to shoot a text message to a friend who you think might be interested, or just a quick message on Instagram as well. Drop us a message, say hi, let us know you're here, and we'll get started in a minute. Yeah, we had lots of people really excited about today. I got quite a few messages saying they're really looking forward to hearing you speak. So looking forward to this.
Good.
Yeah. Should be fun. It looks like you have quite a bright day there today.
Yeah, it's nice. It's about 22 degrees. It's quite warm and nice. It's not too bad.
Yeah.
It's fairly for Glasgow's weather is up and down, so it's just like one day it's cold and rainy and the next day it's sunny and warm, or it's cloudy and warm, or it's always exciting.
Yeah. And are you in Glasgow proper, or are you a little bit outside?
Yeah, I'm sort of like, I live suburban though because of the schools and stuff, but not far from the center of Glasgow.
Yeah, nice. Great. So
have you been to Glasgow before?
No, I haven't. I've been to Aberdeen, I've been to Edinburgh, I've been to Dundee, I've been to the university.
Wow.
So I've been to Scotland a couple of times, but I've actually never made it to Glasgow.
Yeah, no, Glasgow's a great city though. It's a fun place.
Yeah, it's definitely. We were actually watching a TV show right now that's set in Scotland.
Which one? Which one?
Shetland.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's quite
good. Is it good?
It's good. It's grim, but it's good.
Yeah, it must be gritty. Yeah, typical sort of Glasgow.
Yeah. Great. Well, welcome everybody, and we will get started.
सुबह जैसे आँख खोली थी, आपने सोचा कि चलो चाय वाय का बंदोबस्त करते हैं, देखते हैं। जैसे आँख खोली, इधर भी मुर्दा, इधर भी मुर्दा, और मक्खियाँ ऐसी उनके ऊपर कि जैसे कि लेयर ऑफ मक्खियाँ नहीं होती। जब तक 80 जिंदा तुसी भी जिंदा हो, जब 80 मर गए तो फिर उसी जिम्मेवारी साड़ी थी।
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to day 6 of our 16-day program to commemorate the partition of 1947. Yesterday, we had a wonderful speaker with us, Dr. Nadra Khan, who gave us an absolutely eye-opening tour of Lahore from a Mughal, Sikh, and then colonial perspective. I think all of us learned a lot about the shared craftsmanship, about the shared sensibilities, and about the custodianship of craftsmanship that was indigenous to the subcontinent before it was colonized. So we had our 3 days of art. We had our visual arts, the musical arts, and then the architectural arts. And yesterday, as we talked about an immovable art. We talked about art that tells a story by its existence, by standing in a city and being there. And today we're going to speak to somebody who will tell us about an art form that is the exact opposite. Food moves with people. Yes, it's bound by geography, but the geography didn't change that much in terms of what was available for those in Punjab and Sindh specifically. Recipes are family heirlooms that they hold our stories, they hold our histories within them, and we take them with us because they make us feel a certain way, because they remind us of a certain time, and they give us that sense of belonging. Our guest today is going to talk about that, about the importance of the memories of food, about what they do for us, and the journey that food takes us on intergenerationally. She's also going to give us some insight into the regional cuisine of Pakistan, which I, for one, am very, very excited to hear about. Sumayya Usmani is a Pakistani-born cook, writer, and teacher based in Scotland. Her first book, Summers Under the Tamarind Tree, has been described as a spellbinding look at Pakistani cuisine, and it is truly beautiful. It is a very, very personal account and has lovely recipes and photos. And her second book, Mountain Berries and Desert Spice, Sweet Inspiration from the Hunza Valley to the Arabian Sea, looks at regions of Pakistan that perhaps we don't think of most often when we're looking at the cuisine on a world stage, and brings to light perspectives and techniques from regions all over the country. We're very lucky that she's joining us today from Glasgow. So Sumayya, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm just going to sort out my screen 1 second. Hi, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be a part of this, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Me too. I am as well. Sumayya and I actually met in London many years ago, so it's lovely to see you again over Zoom all these years later.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so great that we've kept in touch on all the social media and everything. So that's been really good.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's start with a little bit about you. Can we maybe start with a brief introduction to your own background and the associations that you have with the partition of 1947?
So I'm a real product of partition. I would say that I basically dub myself as a first generation Pakistani, because and a pure sort of result of migration. Because my father's family, I was born in Karachi and I was raised in Karachi from about sort of 10 onwards. And my dad's family migrated in 1947 from Uttar Pradesh, from Jaunpur. So they migrated to Karachi, and so it was, a very sort of heartbreaking sort of time they had moving across, because they'd never been to this part of India before. My mom's side of the family was probably easier for their migration, because initially they were living in Calcutta and in Chittagong, but originally they were from Jabalpur in Punjab, and so they had sort of spent some time all over India, and then obviously their home was in Jabalpur, but they spent a lot of time in Rawalpindi as well because they had family. So their move over to Rawalpindi wasn't as extreme. Right. But they did also move post 1947 and decided to also build a house in Karachi, because Karachi was the place to be, right. But lived in Rawalpindi for a while. So that's my background. And I suppose my memories of food are pretty much two very different memories, because my mom's side of the family cooked very typical Punjabi food, and my dad's side of the family, everybody cooked again, all the 5 aunts and my gran, we all cooked, my dadi and nani both cooked. So I watched a completely different kind of cuisine being cooked, typical North Indian, very much your UP food, right. Where meat is cooked separately and really well, and vegetables are cooked separately and really well. Whereas my mom's side of the family, meat and vegetables always cooked together, and the style of cooking was very different. So I grew up with that, but then I also grew up with this completely different cuisine that was from the province of Sindh, because obviously I was born in Karachi. So there was a real interesting probably never realized that till I moved away, of course, that there was such a different kind of cuisines that I was exposed to. I had friends who were Sindhi, they were from Sindh, their families were generations back Sindhi, or there were friends who were Hyderabadi or Kashmiri or Gujarati, and everyone cooked different food. And I never really struck me why everyone cooked different food until much later, when I started writing about food and understanding food and understanding recipes as well. So that's really, that's really my background.
That's amazing. And were you sort of aware as a young child of these two very different food influences, the ones at home, not sort of outside of that? Or is that something that you also sort of became aware of a little bit later when you started writing?
I was very aware of it. And I was very aware of it because my mother made me very aware of it. And not that I used to cook very much when I was young. I mean, I used to watch and I used to help and I used to always be present in the kitchen. And one of the main thing I always went away with was that my mother, as a Punjabi, always said she hated Punjabi food. And she always said, I hate Punjabi food. And the person who taught me to cook was your dadi, you know, your paternal grandmother. She knew how to cook food because she did it the right UP way, you know, meat is marinated and bhunoed, you know, like cooked a lot until all the flavors are infused in it. And she said, you know, your grandmother, your nani doesn't cook that way. And I never liked her food. And I think it was always very obvious that my mother loved her mother-in-law's food and that she cooked a lot with her. And, you know, I would stand away from that because I loved my nani's food, my maternal grandmother's food, because obviously it was very comforting for me and I was very close to her. But I was very aware of the way that my mom cooked. She picked up a lot, and her food was very much a confluence of Punjabi and UP food, because obviously she loved that so much, but she still had a lot of habits of how she may have watched her mom cooking. So I think, and then, you know, as it's evolved, there's so many dishes my mom makes now that probably, you know, you don't know where they're from because she's picked up from friends who have different, you know, ethnicities and backgrounds. So it's amazing. And I watched all of that, you know, I did, and I absorbed all of that, but I was very aware of the two. Very aware, made very aware.
Oh, that's awesome. And so, you know, you've talked about your mom's cooking, and even when you write a lot about the memories of cooking with your mother and your nanny and sitting. And I think you've said as well that your last supper will be your nanny, your dadi, and your mother, and yourself, and the dishes that you remember or associate the most with them. So can you perhaps share one such memory that you have, but also one maybe that you've recreated for your daughter now that you don't live in Pakistan and live so far away from family?
I think one of the main memories I have is it's funny. It's not a recipe. It's not a flavor. It is actually it is the. It's hard to explain. It's actually not even a technique. It's actually having the time to be intricate with cooking. Now, I think that our cuisine is a very intricate cuisine. You know, it takes their processes and their layers of flavor, and there's time and love put into every process. And I think that one of those things is, you know, you get used to living in the West and making things really quickly because you've got to get to work or you have to go out or whatever. And you're always trying, like, let's make a quick pasta or use convenience foods and add things quickly to make a quick meal. And one of the things I always have done with my daughter, and something that my parents and my moms and my aunts and grandmothers always did, was that the time in the kitchen was a very mindful time. It was a time where you would just sort of escape from your daily hustle bustle, whether it was jobs or cleaning the house or, you know, being a wife or a mother or a sister. And you would just go away to the kitchen as a woman, and you would be with the other ladies in the house. You would be spending time where you can be carefree and talk and chat and have fun, and take time and be intricate with every process, just be within it, whether it's chopping a chili or grinding spices. So that is something I have to say I brought into the house here, and it's something I grew up with, was the process of being mindful with every flavor, with every technique, and really just speaking about it and enjoying that time, not just, you know, physically cooking, but talking about it.
Right. And
I know it's probably not a recipe, but it's just, I think our cuisine is very much about that. You know, it's very much about handing over, teaching andaza, or the art of sort of sensory cooking, teaching someone to be, you know, like my daughter will now say that she's adding cumin in something. You know, she's 11, she's going to be 12 next month. And she knows how much cumin to add into something, I don't know, like a dal, tarka or something. Yeah. And she'll know how to do it. And I don't know, I haven't taught her, but she's watched because she was mindful at the time. And I think that is how we all learn to cook. And it's an important part of our culture to teach people, to teach your family how to cook that way. So yeah, that's what I would say. I still do.
No, absolutely. I think I remember when I was younger, you know, my mother would say, I'd say how much, and she would say andaze se dalo, and I was like, I don't understand. Like, what is that? And as you grow into it, you understand. You're like, yeah, actually, the only way to do it, and I think you put it beautifully, it's sensory cooking. It's not measured. You know, it's not calculated cooking. It's sensory cooking.
Exactly. And the senses, and one of the main senses you share in the kitchen is the sense of sound, of processed sound, whether it's grinding or hearing the thing splutter in the dish, or hearing your, who you're cooking with tell you, this is how much it needs. It needs a balance of three things. So all those things are very important. And I think those things are what we need to carry down. And they are part of our culture, so deeply part of our culture, whether it's Indian or Pakistani or anyone in the subcontinent, really. Yeah. That's how you learn to cook. So yes, that's really important to me.
And what do you think it is? It's the sounds, it's the techniques, it's the culture, but it's all centered around food. So what do you think it is about food that makes it such a powerful medium of memory?
I think that, taste is a very transportive sense. Mm-hmm. So the minute, a bit like smell, but I think taste has an added advantage. Taste has the ability to conjure up not just flavor, but very predominantly memories of associating a point in time, whether it's someone who you love cooking for you, or it's a really bad experience where you went on a bad date, or anything. We're not talking about our culture, but anything. Yeah. Basically, you went there, you're like, oh, I can never eat that again. Or a memory of a bad time when you cooked something and it turned out really badly. Even if you make it well, you'll always have an association to it. And it takes you not just to a place where you were, but in a place in your heart where you were. And I think that is why it is such a powerful tool of transporting memory, because it doesn't just take you there, but it takes your heart there as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's really beautiful. Beautiful. And so what's a comfort dish for you that takes you right back to your childhood home in Karachi?
A couple of things, actually. I used to be a very big meat eater because Pakistanis are very big meat eaters. I have, in the last few years, become more of a vegetarian, and I enjoy more vegetables. I do still eat meat, but, I probably eat meat once or twice a month. Yeah. But I have to say that the ones that take me back and really give me comfort are my meat dishes. Yeah. And one of them is a mutton pulao. I do love pulao because I think that it is very, it has a really deep memory for me with my nani, because she used to always, Punjabis love their pulao. Yeah. So she used to always make pulao, and it used to always have this very specific kind of aroma that would just take me back. And, she's no longer with us. So obviously every time I make it, I just remember the times I spent with her and when she used to make it. But then my mother used to make mutton pulao, and it used to taste completely different. And I knew when it was my mom's mutton pulao and it was my nani's mutton pulao. Right. That's a very specific dish that conjures up a real memory. And then the other one is, again, a rice dish, because I do love rice, is aloo ki tehri, which is the turmeric potato rice. Again, my dadi used to make a lot because the UPs love tehri. And so she used to always make that. So yes, that's a vegetarian dish that I still very much love. But what I really loved the most, I think, out of everything that my mom made, and my dadi even made, was just chapatis. Just that smell of, rolling the chapati dough and then popping it onto the tawa and cooking it. And then that, when you throw it, fling it on the fire flame, and it starts to puff up, and that charred smell. Yeah. That is just, to me, that is the memory of home. Any kitchen on the planet that I've ever cooked in, whether it's New York or London or Glasgow or wherever I am doing some demo, if I make a chapati, it doesn't matter where I am. I could be in soggy Glasgow in the rain. I will be in Karachi in one of my grandmother's kitchens or my mother's kitchen, for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the simplest things.
Yeah, it is.
Take you back. I actually had a question. A lot of South Asian food is around, is seasonal food. You eat certain things, we associate things with the weather, and we eat, something you'll eat a masala good in the winter, you won't necessarily eat in the summer, and things like that. So how do you still follow any of those things in Glasgow? Are you able to? Is there maybe a local produce that you've incorporated into your cooking?
Yeah, well, I have two ways of looking at that. One is sometimes I miss certain things like bhindi or, teende, or things that you don't get in Britain necessarily. So I do go to my local sort of Asian greengrocer, and I get my stuff from there and I make it. Mm-hmm. But I'm very much a believer in true seasonality, that there is a reason why we eat seasonally, and the reason behind it is very important, not just to your culture, but also very much to your body and your gut and how you look after yourself. And extremely important for the ecosystem. So I am quite an environmentalist at heart, and I do believe that if you are in a different country, and if you can, as much as possible, try to use what is local and seasonal to the place that you live. Which obviously means that you can't make those specific things that maybe you could make, when you were in India or Pakistan, wherever you were from. So what I have done is I have incorporated a lot of local produce into the techniques that I know and the flavors that I know, and replicated them using seasonal produce. What it has done is it's resulted in a new flavor and a new dish, and in something that speaks of two cultures or speaks of two lands. And I think that's really an important thing to celebrate when you are, a foreigner living in a different country. It's a nice way of celebrating both the produce and then also eating seasonally, but not losing the essence of your cuisine, because you're still cooking the same flavors. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Before we sort of shift gears a little bit to talk more about Pakistani cuisine as a whole, I was wondering if you could just give everybody watching a brief overview of your two books, because they are very different from one another.
Thank you. Well, the first book, Summers Under the Tamarind Tree, Recipes and Memories from Pakistan, was very much a memoir-style cookbook. So it's not just recipes, but it's lots of memories of growing up in Pakistan. And what I wanted it to be was pretty much all the recipes that I grew up eating or having learned from people. So it's not a definitive answer to a Pakistani cookbook covering all the different parts of Pakistan. That's hopefully my future plans. But it is very much an insight into what was on my table and what I grew up eating. The great thing about it was that my publisher was really flexible with what I wanted to put into it. So I was able to really make it very personal. And making it personal meant that it wasn't just about me, it was actually about every Pakistani that I know, every Karachiite anyway that I know. And most people from the big cities, they would relate a lot to the book. And the idea was to give them a book where, reading a memory, which is obviously mine, would resonate with them. So that's what the book is all about. And the second book, Mountain Berries and Desert Spice, Sweet Inspirations from the Hunza Valley to the Arabian Sea, is the whole title. Is exactly that, sweet inspirations. There's desserts. Now, why did I pick desserts? A lot of people ask, because dessert books are harder to sell and they're tougher to get a good market for. But I really felt like the desserts, even though personally I don't have a huge sweet tooth, but I do like making desserts for people. And I do love what they stand for, which is that they're not just the end of a meal. They are about celebration. They're about sharing, rejoicing. It's about, much more than the end of a meal. And it is such an important part of our culture, muh meetha karna, and all of that sort of thing about sweetening someone's mouth because you're happy about something, whether it's marriage or engagement or exams being passed. So that's what it was. I really wanted, but I didn't just want it to be about what we call sweetmeats or mithai. I wanted it to be about this is where I could bring in a bit of regionality. So I brought in desserts that are unusual and made in, say, the Hunza Valley or in Kailash and all these different kind of areas where we don't get to go and don't realize that a lot of the desserts are very differently influenced, very much about seasonal produce. But I also wanted to talk about places like Lahore and ones that I make at home, and different ethnicities that live in Pakistan, like the Parsis and the Gujaratis and all these different people that have brought in a lot of their desserts as well. Little less known desserts, really. So that's where these two books are quite different from each other.
Amazing. Yeah, super interesting. And I mean, you have really been a pioneer in bringing regional Pakistani food to the forefront on an international scale. And for many Indians, I think one of the things that we may have lost sight of in the last 73 years is the regionality of Pakistan, because so much happened with Punjab and Sindh. And then Bengal later on, but so much happened with Punjab and Sindh in 47 that we forget about all of the different cultures that exist beyond that. So as we shift gears, can you maybe talk to us, give us a little bit of a tour, tell us what the different regions are and some general characteristics of foods from those regions?
Yeah. Pakistan is a very interesting country because of what we inherited. when we sort of divided, because Pakistan is so diverse in its geography and where it lies on the map of South Asia. You have obviously the more recognizable, obviously Punjab, and then the whole sort of Sindh and Gujarat divide. But then you have all these like very unapproachable, very, very sort of difficult areas to get to, like the north parts of Pakistan, Khyber but I always can't say the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa all the time. I always find it so difficult because I grew up saying WFP, and I know the history, I know the politics behind why it moved to become what it is now, but I still kind of think of it that way. But the northern areas are all very diverse, because obviously the Pashtuns living in one side, but then you also have all the very so if you go to Chitral, you have very Central Asian people, and then obviously go to Kailash, and you go on, you go into the Baltistan area, the people that are very different. So I think that there's such a huge, massive area that was very difficult to get to, and people never really explored it as a part of a country. They always said, oh yeah, Pakistan is basically Sindh and Punjab, but you never think of Balochistan and the northern areas. And it's for many reasons. It's language differences, it's cultural differences, ethnicity differences. It's also how difficult these places are to reach. But the cuisines are so different. And that is what I was, and I have to be honest, when I lived in Pakistan, I never even thought about them. I never even thought that there was a different cuisine until I moved and I started to research more, and I realized how different it was. And it was fascinating. Always being having me in a history buff, I always found that the way that the food in the north is, that it's so influenced by Central Asia and by China, that you're amazed at the kind of dishes that turn up there. Everything from noodles and dumplings and soups that are really simple and more Chinese in the way they're made, to wok cooking, obviously in Baltistan, the balti, and that kind of like cooking with the big balti, which is basically a wok. But then you go to like, I went to Kailash a few years ago, and I have a friend who is from Ukraine, and she writes cookbooks as well. And she was amazed at some of the pies that I learned from there, very similar to the ones that they make in Moldova. So it was really, really random, but there's so many influences from Central Asia and Russia as well. So it's intriguing, and I'm sure they don't even know it, but their food is so different from anything. And the biggest surprise, of course, in the northern areas is the food has no chili, and they don't really eat the food that we do in the south, which is spicy and hot. Their food is very simple. It normally just has pepper and salt in it, and it's very meat based. And then you go to Balochistan, and it's all about a very nomadic way of life. So their cooking is a bit influenced from Afghanistan, obviously, because of the border and the fluidity of it. But the food is extremely different. I mean, there's a lot more, again, carcass driven, everything's cooked in a big thing, and everything's in a sand pit, and it's all being roasted slowly. And of course, then there's Sindh, which is a different story altogether.
Right.
And I mean, Sindhi food is, I find Sindhi food one of the most delicious sort of foods from the whole subcontinent, so whole India, whole of Pakistan. I love Sindhi food the most. And I think I love it because it's very much about freshness. There's a lot of freshness in the food. They cook a lot of greens, they cook a lot of fresh fish. They definitely have a different style of cooking, and using up a lot of local produce that we grew up with but didn't know what to do as migrant people. They're like, what do you do with lotus root? The Sindhis it was always like they were very intriguing ingredients that they use, and I do love their food, and it's got such a deep rooted history in the land as well, which is the most inspiring. And then Punjabi food, Lahore has always been the food capital of Pakistan and always will be, but they do love their grub, the Punjabis, and it's pretty evident every time I go there to visit cousins. We start eating at like noon in the afternoon, we finish by like 2 o'clock in the morning. So, so the food there is very typical Punjabi, but you get everything in Lahore. You get everything. But Punjabi food there it's similar to probably Punjabi food, and I haven't been to the Punjab in India, but I would assume that there's a lot of crossovers there. We probably eat more meat. And another thing that's really, I mean, I'm going back to Sindh, that Karachi is very big on barbecue food because of the very rich Arab influences as well. So that's something I forgot to miss. So yeah, so that's, it's quite a vibrant and very distinctively unique cuisine. But then you also have all the migrant food as well. So, you forget that there was so much migration and so many people brought their flavors to Pakistan when they came, the Muslim Indians. And there's a lot of flavor fusion there. So there's a lot of Hyderabadis who probably cook the same Hyderabadi food that they cook in Hyderabad in India, but it's changed because of local differences and local tastes and different ingredients. So there is a lot of mixture of and confluence of cuisines from sort of Muslim Indian people that brought it to Pakistan as well. So there's this whole other cuisine.
Yeah, that's evolved in the last sort of the odd years. But actually that leads me nicely to the next question. So I often say that the term Indian food as a term it's sort of not only entirely misleading, but it also doesn't really tell you anything in and of itself. It doesn't have a definition that you can attribute to it. And so though the cuisine may change sort of every 100 kilometers or so, they're very distinct different cuisines throughout the country. So do you feel similarly with Pakistan, and or are there some sort of generally defining characteristics that you can say, across Pakistan, everybody eats this at home?
I think everyone in Pakistan does like a good biryani.
Yeah.
So there'll always be a good biryani. There isn't anything you can't get everywhere. Most things would be similar in most of the urban areas. People in villages cook very differently anyway. So you would never really compare what you eat in the cities to what you eat in the villages. So I think the real food is to be had in the villages, whether it's, a village in Tharparkar in Sindh, or it's a village, I don't know, in Punjab somewhere, in Multan, say, for example, or you go to Peshawar, the food, it's a big city, but, it's very, very provincial in its way of life. And so the food there is very different. So I think that the commonality would be breads. There are always going to be some form of naans and rotis that are very similar, and you'll always find. And I think most Pakistanis, no matter where you are, do love their biryani and some kind of rice dish. Other than that, every region in Pakistan has different cuisine. But I think that unlike India, Pakistan has never, and at least Pakistanis have, if you live in Sindh, I don't know if this is true because I don't know how Indians view the rest of Indian regional cuisine. But in Pakistan, if you live in Sindh, that is the way you think food is. That's the way we cook. And if you live in Punjab, nobody really thinks about it, except for a couple of dishes that you have found their way into the cities. For example, sajji from Balochistan, which is a spit roast chicken and lamb, or a charga, which is Lahori. It's made its way into like the rest of Pakistan. Right. I would say very little is known by the Pakistani about the regionality of food, and I don't think they care as long as they eat what they like and it's in their. Then most Karachiites will never eat food from Northwest sort of area. They would not be interested in it. But I, on the other hand, when I went up to Chitral a few years ago, I was trying to try out different cuisine and all the things that they had. And my parents had gone with me, and they were just not impressed by any of the food. Oh, it's so bland, it's so boring, it's so watery, it's so this, and because they're so stuck in their ways of eating their typical grub. Yeah. I don't know if it's the same in India. I mean, South Indian food is so different from North Indian or Central Indian food.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
I have no idea whether people there like other foods in India, but in Pakistan, people are very snobby about where they're from.
Yeah, I think in India there's a few regions that are where the food is so popular that you can find it anywhere in the country. Like you can get a dosa in any city in India, right? Like no matter how far up north you are. Obviously how good the dosa is may vary, but you can get it anywhere. So I think there is an openness. That being said, I think at home, there's probably few regions that you might explore, and there are some where we just don't know much about the food at all on a large scale. Of course, there are people who know it, but I'm talking about like, if you went out on the street, would you find a restaurant from state X? I think there are a few that have become like poster children of popular restaurants, but there's still more to learn. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between food from Peshawar to Lahore to Rawalpindi, all obviously within Punjab?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be very honest with you. I find hard pressed to find much of a difference between the food that I've eaten in Pindi and the food that I've eaten in Lahore. But then that's because I always go, well, I say that, but I went to an incredible restaurant in Islamabad a couple of years ago. And I had, and I don't think it's the dishes that are named differently. It's the way that they cook that particular dish and the way that it tastes that is different. And I would hold that to a couple of things. Who is cooking the dish? The person, what is their background, where they're from, what are the influences they've had, and the other thing is the ingredients as to what is available there. I think that the ghee and yogurt and all of these things in Punjab area is so much more creamier and tastier. You know, it's very much a farming land. Everything is very pure and rich. And I think that they just, the way that they make, say, for example, their ghee or their yogurt is just so much more creamier. I don't know what it is. It's just the way it is. It's very seasonal and regional to that area. Yeah. But I also feel like the cooking techniques in what I've seen in Islamabad as opposed to Lahore, there is a slight, very subtle difference that probably isn't visible to the naked eye or to someone who's not discerning about cooking. Mm-hmm. But I went to this restaurant in Islamabad and I had the most incredible kadhai, like a chicken kadhai. Mm-hmm. But there was something about the way that man made. I mean, I watched him, I videoed the guy. I don't know what it was, but it was the way he added things. He cooked the chicken with the tomatoes, a bit like how my mom does it, and doesn't add any oil to it or any ghee to it. He just cooks it until all the liquid and the juices of the tomatoes come out. Mm-hmm. And then he adds the spices and the ghee. And it was just very different from anywhere I've seen it done before in, say, in Sindh, the way they make kadhai. So it was just a little, you know, again, don't know if it was just him or it was a technique in the country, in that area in the country. Yeah. But then you go to Lahore, and I find Lahore is very much about celebrating all of Pakistani food. So you find nihari and halim and chicken tikkas, but then you find specific Lahori things like chikkar chole and, you know, obviously charga and lots of typical kind of Lahori things that people love. So I think in Punjab, the food is very, at least in Pakistani Punjab, is very meat heavy. Mm-hmm. There's definitely loads of meat happening, lots of beef. Right. Yeah. And people do love a lot of street food.
Yeah. And you mentioned that biryani is the one thing that, you know, everybody around the country loves a good biryani. Yeah. Are there particular traits of a biryani from Karachi versus a biryani from Balochistan or biryani from Lahore?
Yeah, I think, see, for me, I think the right place to eat a biryani in the whole country is in someone's house. That is actually from that region. So say a Sindhi biryani cooked by a Sindhi person who's probably been making it for, you know, can go back 10 generations and tell you the recipe's theirs. Yeah. Or someone in Lahore who makes a typical Lahori chicken biryani that is, you know, say 10-year generations again can go back. So I think it's very, you know, if you go to the street side restaurants, they all sort of taste the same, right? But I have to say, out of all the different biryanis I've eaten across the country, I personally love a Sindhi biryani. And why I love it is because it is very distinct from the other biryanis in the country. It's a hard thing. It's very muddy, the whole biryani thing in Pakistan, because there's so many people that have, you know, backgrounds of saying being from UP or from Hyderabad or being Lahori, whatever. And all the biryanis are quite mixed up and they've learned it. But the Sindhi biryani is the purest biryani that there is in Pakistan, because it's very distinct to that area. It's been cooked for centuries, the way that it's been cooked. And the predominant features is that there is a dried pomegranate, anar dana in it. There's always potatoes and meat. And the third thing is that it always has sour plums in it, aloo bukhara. Okay. So it's very, very specific.
And sour plums is not something you see much of in the cuisine. I mean, do you see it in the cuisine otherwise in Karachi?
Sour plums? Not much, but I think there's a lot of influence from Afghanistan and Saudi Arabian food.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that flavor of putting sweet with savory or tart with savory. So it is a very, very typical biryani, and it is a hard one to find anywhere else. You know, it's something that you just don't have. So I think that is a very pure regional biryani. And there are many other biryanis, of course, across the country. Sorry, my cat's in the background. And but that is, to me, one of my favorites personally. And so that is one that, you know, distinctively stands alone from everything else that you would have in the India, sort of Pakistan region.
Right. And what are biryanis like in the north? Are they less spiced? Or are they?
They are very generic. The ones I've had are generic. I don't think it's a very sort of typical thing in the north. What is very typical in the north is Afghani palau style dishes, because there's a lot of Afghani influence in the food, and you would find more palaus and the more the rice. One of the most interesting things I discovered in sort of the Chitral area was a dish called khamuti, which is a sort of a palau, but it is mutton based and it's cooked with rice, and the rice is a different grain. It's called beguni rice, which is very short grain, and they grow it locally. So they don't use basmati, they use that particular rice. And the way it's cooked is that the meat, again, it's a bit like a pulao. The stock is cooked, and then the meat and the taken out, and the rice is cooked with the meat. But they sprinkle at the end with raw walnut oil walnut oils that have softened onions in it, and they pour that over. Now that was very unusual, and they are not really, they don't really eat biryanis because they don't eat many spices, but this is the way they cook, and the dish is cooked very simply in just, I think it was just cumin that she added in the dish, and there was nothing else, cumin and maybe cinnamon, but not many spices, because obviously the spices were never a big thing in their cuisine. So they do eat more sort of rice and meat-based dishes, not necessarily saffron-based safranis, the biryanis.
Biryanis, yeah. We have a lot of questions coming in. So before I ask another question, I might just take a few of these, otherwise I'll lose track of them. So the first one is slow cooking in angitis is very common in most Punjabi homes. Are they still used in homes in Pakistan?
Angiti cooking? Yeah, so my nani's families had an angiti in their garden. You know, they had a big house in Pindi, and they had an outside courtyard. And as most homes in Pakistan do have these outside kitchens, and they did have an angiti sort of style of cooking. I think it's probably still a lot of villages still do that kind of cooking, but in the cities no longer so much. And it's sad because some of the most delicious food is cooked that way. And that slow cooking, that sort of like forget about it kind of cooking, it's going to take 4 hours to cook. You can't, you're always worried about your electric bill or your gas bill, or this is a beautiful way of cooking. And the only other place I saw it was when I went up north. I saw a lot of people cooking that way still in sort of villages and less sort of urban areas. So there's still that happening in less developed parts of Pakistan, but not in the cities.
I think that's probably similar to India as well. It's rare to see in urban areas. Someone's asking, what are some of the seasonal desserts you featured in your second book, or maybe fourth book? I think that one of the main things that I really loved was, again, when I went to the north, they make these rishiki pancakes from buckwheat flour, and they make these beautiful, really thin pancakes with buckwheat flour, which is, naturally very good for you, and it's gluten-free and it's delicious, and it has a really nutty flavor. And they sprinkle it with a thing called shiri, which is an overnight cooked mulberry syrup, which when they pick a mulberry season, they harvest all the mulberries on the mountains, and then they cook them into a syrup, which takes about 12 to 14 hours cooked on a slow fire. And that is a delicious dessert. It has such a simple combination of local seasonal ingredients, and it's amazing. And so they sprinkle that, and they sprinkle some apricot kernels, so hunza apricot kernel oil. That to me is one of the most delicious desserts I've had. And the other thing I really like is just pure hunza apricots, and they make a dish where they make it just with cream. So they cook the apricots with the seeds in, and then they just sprinkle cream, a bit like your Kubani ka meetha, but a bit different because it's actually simpler. It's actually so simple. There's no custard, no nothing. It's just cream and apricots. So that, and then the other thing I really love is I'm a big fan of gajak,
okay, which is your sort of sesame seed dessert. So these are kind of dishes I do have in the book, and it's such a delicious brittle. So those kind of things are my favorite dishes. I'm more sort of unusual desserts.
Yeah.
And I love a good kheer. I love a good kheer. That is in the book.
Can you just repeat the name of the first one?
The mulberry pancakes, rishiki.
Rishiki. Write that down.
It's in the book as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Someone else has asked, does the dhaba culture still exist in the villages in Pakistan? Is that still a big culture?
Dhaba is, yeah. I mean, dhaba eating is city, village, you name it. Dhabas are a way of life. You know, everywhere you go in Pakistan, you will always have dhaba, whether it's chai or full food. You know, it's part of our culture in both parts of the subcontinent, I would say. So yeah, very much so.
And is there a distinct dhaba cuisine, or does it vary based on where you are?
It is. There is a dhaba cuisine, and the dhaba cuisine again is very regional. So the dhaba cuisine on the highway, for example, is very well known because it's like connecting sort of Punjab to Sindh or, you know, Balochistan, and it depends on where you are on the side of which province, and the food is very specific to that area. Another thing is that the Karachi dhaba food is interesting because there's a lot of seafood in it. There's lots of prawns, lots of fish tikkas, and then I think that if you go into Sindh, there's definitely more sort of palla fish and more sort of regional Sindhi dishes that are made at dhabas. And if you go to Punjab, then you have a typical Punjabi fare in the dhaba. So it is very regional for sure. But chai is always there. The chai is always made by the Pashtuns, and it is very rich and very delicious. But then you also have, of course, Kashmiri chai and all the different varieties of chais that you now have, all the sort of modernized ones.
Right.
But yeah, there. And then if you go to the north, you normally have keva with salt, and they always have like a block of salt that they put in it. So, you know, different things like that, little regional differences.
Very interesting. Someone's asking, where can one find I might say this wrong, putta tikka or putta tikka, I don't know, lamb's liver barbecued in the fat from the fat tail?
Yes, that is a very Afghani thing.
Okay.
And I mean, you can get it in Karachi because you can get everything in Karachi.
Right.
They take the meat, the dumba meat, and then they put one piece, and it's very marinated very simply. It normally just has salt and pepper and maybe ginger, garlic, I don't know, but they always make it very simple. There's no masala as such. And then they add that to the skewer, and next to it, they put a piece of fat, so lamb fat, or mutton fat, or dumba fat, and then again a piece of meat, and then fat. And what happens is, as it cooks on the barbecue, all the juices from the fat go into the meat and soften it, give it loads of flavor. And it has to be eaten hot, because when it's cold, it's not so delicious, because there's nothing like cold fat. But because when it's hot, you can actually chew onto the fat. It just literally melts in your mouth, and there's so much flavor in that. So my mouth's watering this, thinking about it. Actually bringing it up where it was, and then I have to go make it now. But it is delicious, and it's fresh off the coals is the only way to eat it.
Wow. Yeah. Is there a special vegetable dish that you associate with a particular part of Pakistan that you love?
There is this one dish that I had again up in the north. See, I love that part of the country. It's called mishi, and it is black-eyed beans that are very simply cooked until soft. So not soft, but they hold their shape, they cook through. So black-eyed beans with a topping of fresh cream, blitzed with tomatoes, coriander, lemon juice, salt. Yeah, and it's just laid on the top, and then they sort of layer it on again with walnut oil and onions, and it's amazing. I mean, to me, that is my favorite Pakistani vegetable dish, because I think that it's so different from all the ones that I grew up eating. Because I think most of the stuff I ate was either my dadi's or my nani's recipes, and you know, this is something I discovered, and I love it. And I also like it because it's not spicy. It's just really, really simple. It has just a flavor of simplicity and rural flavors, you know, the way people eat there. So yeah, for me, that has to be one of my favorites.
Awesome. Everyone is saying, wow. Everyone's really amazing. Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, before I come back to this, is does Pakistan also have kemak chai? Not sure what that is.
Kemak chai. I don't know.
Kaymak. Kemak.
Not that I know of. I mean, I haven't come across it. I would be love to be educated what that is. No, don't know.
Maybe tell us, whoever's asked the question, if you can maybe just tell both of us what that is. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe I know it and I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, exactly. And so you've referred to Sindhi food a few times, and actually tomorrow we have a Sindhi historian, Saz Agarwal, who will be talking to us about, Sindh and partition. But what I was wondering if you could tell us is Sindhi food in Pakistan similar to Sindhi food in India, or is the food that remained with the population that stayed quite different to that which left with the Hindus, Sindhis, and
I don't know what it's like in the Indian side. So I don't know, the Sindhis that moved or the Hindu Sindhis that moved to India. I don't know whether they've changed the way they cook, but I do know this, that there is definitely a very rich and vibrant Sindhi cuisine culture within only the Sindhis that live there. They're very provincial minded in their ways because they were very proud of their heritage and their food, which rightly so they should be because it's so steeped in history. But I think that the way they cook is that probably the only massive difference that probably most Sindhis who, the Hindu Sindhis that moved away, or the Sindhis, Muslim Sindhis that moved away, would be that there is definitely more meat dishes. I think that, things like dal pakwan and all these dishes like the lotus root stir fry, all those things are similar. I think it's very, very much a family cooked dish. Nobody really, there's not many restaurants that celebrate Sindhi cuisine. I mean, there is one or two, but not enough. I think there should be more. I think that more people need to rejoice this incredible cuisine. There's such a deep history that goes back centuries to one of the first civilizations on the planet, and there is so much to be discovered. And not just the family food, but then the food that the people cooked in say the Indus Valley civilization areas. All those different parts. I'm sure all these dishes that people make today are very much based on the dishes that were made by the people, by their ancestors. So I think that there is a real need for that. I wish someone would do it because it is a beautiful cuisine from what I've tasted. I also think that the Muslim way of Sindhi Muslim way is probably similar to the Hindu way. I don't think there's a huge difference. I don't know many Hindu Sindhis, I have to admit. Only ones I know are the ones that I grew up in Pakistan, and most of them are all Muslims. And their food but it was very lentil and vegetable based. But they were also meat dishes, like the biryani is very much a meat dish. But there is definitely more of a beautiful flavor of seasonality that they rejoice.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, Sindhi food is something that I've only really started getting into in the last maybe 2-3 years and understanding more about the cuisine. And I agree, there needs to be more restaurants. We need to be eating this food more and understanding it better as well. Of all the things you spoke about, walnut oil seems to have, it is the most unusual sort of subcontinentally. And so can you shed some light on, I suppose, why it's dominant in the north? Is there,
The reason is very simple. The north has always been very cut off from the rest of the country because of the terrain. And also it's been very cut off from the rest of the country because of the ethnicity and languages. So they've always felt that they were different, and they are, ethnically very different. So they being cut off, so obviously culturally, they were very cut off, so they have their own way of doing things. The second is because of the part of the country that was very cut off geographically, they have had to be very self-sufficient with eating what is just grown on their lands. And some of the most incredible things, it's not easy to get vegetable oil. You're not going to get, other oils, and they do eat a lot of animal fat, but that again is seasonal. Is it goat season? Is it lamb season? Do you want to cook with it? Now, the walnut oil is much of their cuisine because of two reasons. Is because they grow a lot of walnuts and there's an abundance of walnuts. It's cheap for them to produce at home, which is what they do. There is also another oil that they use a lot of, but they don't cook with it. It is apricot kernel oil. So Hundra apricot kernel oil is used very much on top of things. as a topping, is used on their skins, is used as an ointment, is used as a tonic. But walnut oil that you cook a lot, they add tadka with a lot of walnut oil, and it's because it's regional. And the other thing they do with a lot of walnuts is they add them in a lot of their pies and a lot of their desserts. And not just sweet pies, and they make those kind of, I said the East European kind of pies. So they add crushed walnuts in it with local cheese and spinach, and they wrap them up. So it's and they very rustically wrap it up like a hand pie. So I think that it's because of what's grown there, and they do eat very off their land. I mean, they'll have things. There's a delicious dish that I discovered when I was there. It's found in Pakistan as well. It's called kali, and it's a soup that has a sort of a paprika-based stock, and has meat, like minced keema in it, and it has hand pulled noodles. So you just actually make noodles out of hand pulled dough, normally chapati dough. Yeah, right. And then they have mountain thyme. It's like they call it mountain cumin, but it's very thyme-like in its flavor. And then the most surprising thing, local grown mountain capers. And it's like the most unusual dish, but it was absolutely divine. So simple, no masala, no nothing. Is a bit of cumin in it, but delicious. Again, that's a very local, specific thing. And a lot of them cook. They add sometimes a tadka of walnut oil on top if they want. I think it's just a regional thing. It's just availability.
Right. And does walnut oil have a high smoking point?
Yes.
Quite well.
Yeah. Quite. Yeah. It's really quick.
Yeah.
So so you have to be super quick with it, and whatever you're doing with it is normally quite quick. You don't want to cook it, overcook it. It can get toxic, they say, if you cook it for, I don't know. I don't know if this is true, but someone's always, you don't cook nut oils for too long because they can.
Yeah. What someone's asking, can you speak to the kebab culture of Pakistan as vis-a-vis how it is in India, or just the kebab culture in Pakistan even?
The kebab culture in Pakistan is pretty big. I mean, everyone likes a good tikka. Karachi is very much about having chicken tikkas, a quarter chicken tikka with a masala. And I don't know what it's like in India, but it's very spicy. Then, of course, you have your Sikh kebabs and your boti kebabs, and you have the dumba ones, the Afghani kebabs with the meat in them. But then there's all these other, there's malai kebabs, just like you would have in India, but it's just about flavors. It's how they're made. Yeah. I think that it's just about local influences that have probably changed flavors. The names are probably the same, but tastes could be different. In the north, like in Peshawar and stuff, you have a lot of typical kind of tikkas that they make, which are very simple, and they're more basted with just like pepper and salt and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a huge kebab culture. No, you love having parathas and kebabs. It's just with chutneys. Yum.
I think we need to find some for dinner now.
Yes.
Okay, so last two questions, and I might put you on the spot a little bit.
Of course.
So first is top 3 dishes that somebody who hasn't been to Pakistan should absolutely try to either make if they can't find it or find.
Saji.
Okay.
Love a good saji. Saji is a slow roast spit-fired lamb or chicken, but I prefer the lamb one. It's very simple in its flavor, but it's the spit roast and the slow heat from the spit roast that makes it very delicious and, comes off the bone. Charga, for sure. Charga is delicious, but I'm sure you know of charga. And I think if people don't know what it is, it's obviously a steamed whole chicken that is then flash fried, and you have a lovely chaat masala topping and lemon juice. So good.
Okay.
So good. And nihari. If you do eat lamb shanks and mutton shanks, a beautiful Lahori nihari, just the meat falling off the bone, 6-7 hours of cooking, lots of oil floating on the top. There's nothing like it. So yes, I'm afraid it's all meat dishes.
Oh, lovely. So guys, everybody, please go and find yourself some saji, some nihari, and some Lahori charga, and then we can all just bask in how delicious these 3 are. And finally, the age-old question: Karachi food or Lahore?
Oh, see, now, if you had asked me 15 years ago when I still lived in Pakistan, I would, with absolute conviction, say Karachi food. right? But I will say that I love Lahori food. I will say that I absolutely love Lahore. I'm totally in love with that city. It's one of my favorite cities to visit. Karachi is home. I love Karachi because I have memories there, and I love some of the food and the family and everything. But Lahore is a great place to explore, and there's so much history, and there's so much of that history that's physically evident because of the buildings and the roads and the way that they've preserved everything. And the food, it's an all day and night thing. It's not about we're just going to go have dinner. It is we are going out to eat for the whole day. So if you want to eat, Lahore is the place, and there's a huge street food culture, and it's people live and breathe food in Lahore. Yeah. And I think if you're really going to enjoy food in Pakistan, you can get all the cuisine, all the food from everywhere there. So yeah, I would say this is terrible for a Karachiite to admit this, but I was going to say on kebabs, just going back quickly, have you heard of dhaga kebabs? Okay, so there is a very typical, there's an area in Karachi called Burns Road, which is like an old part of Karachi where you have loads of food. And there is a dhaga kebab, which is this melt in the mouth meat that's been marinated with lots of papaya, so it's very soft and full of bone. And they wrap it up with a string, with a thin thread. And it's steam cooked in a dechki. And I think it's bori, if I'm not mistaken, it's bori. And someone might kill me if it's not bori, but I think it is bori. And then it steams and it cooks and it like literally melts. And you open the dhagas out and all the meat just falls apart. It's amazing. Sorry, I had to go back with the kebab because I just remembered that.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been, it's been lovely. And I think we've all learned so much about, the parts of Pakistan that many people may not have explored before, but also the subtle regional differences, as you said. And I think that's what makes a lot of South Asian food so intriguing, is that things change subtly as you drive just a little further, and then a little bit further, and then a little bit further, and then you've gone 200 kilometers and a whole new cuisine has emerged.
I love it. And I think Pakistan and India, and in a way, Pakistan is more evident of that real mixture of differences, is because so many people moved, obviously migrated to a country that they would have never gone to or taken their cuisines to. And it was a forced evolution of food. And that is why you see such a difference. It's so hard to pinpoint. Sometimes I find it's like such a cloudy thing, such a gray area. What the hell is Pakistani food? It's like, it's hard to explain. It's a real fusion of all of that, It's a mixture of all the people that came there who weren't supposed to be there or would have never come there otherwise. And they brought their cuisine. And I'm sure that in India, the same thing happened for some of the Sindhis that moved over, or some of, but not many people moved over. See what I mean? The people who really cooked that rich food from that area, like Hyderabad and Uttar Pradesh, moved to an area where they didn't know about these things. So it's actually quite a stark difference, which is probably quite subtle to a Pakistani growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us and taking us on this journey today. It's been lovely. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming back this evening, or thank you for joining us if you joined us for the first time today. I think we can all agree that Sumayya has left us very hungry, and we must now all go and find some Pakistani food wherever we can. So with that, we will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we have Sindhi author and historian, Saz Agarwal, who will be joining us, and we will be discussing we'll be discussing Sindhi history, and we'll also talk a little bit about her wonderful book, Sindh, The Story of a Vanished Homeland. So thank you so much, and see you tomorrow.